Well, we're back after a long weekend of 2 days off. Joe Chaffee and Joe Rayo on the Joe and Joe Weather Show, which backwards is the Joe and Joe Weather Show, and we have uh, we have a ton of stuff going on tonight, Joe. We've got the start of hurricane season, which really started 2 weeks ago. We're almost onto our third named storm.
Right.
Which by the way, if it happens before Friday, it'll be the earliest we've ever seen the third named storm. It is we've got maybe a severe weather threat for Wednesday, which we're going to take a look at. We just passed the Timothy Veltman reminding me that this was the we come up to the 22nd anniversary to the only time in the Storm Prediction Center's history that they put a high risk of severe weather across the state of New York. And that was back on May 29th,
1998.
1998.
Right.
Yes, and I got some maps for that. Also, Scott Briller reminded me, because I forgot to do this last week. I actually started to do it in the show, but I never did. But being that it is the start of hurricane season, I want to look back at a couple of years that were very active, that started off active early, and whether we could draw any conclusions out of it, we probably can't. But just sort of as a refresher, because uh, years where you have two named storms in the month of May are few and far between. And if we wind up with a third, or possibly, depending on how this whole thing plays out this week, it could be in two. You could have two separate systems, and you could have a third and a fourth. But we'll get to that. Okay, I've said
Well,
enough. Now you talk.
yeah, yeah, it's and of course I'm thinking back to not too long ago when back in the 90s our first tropical system didn't come until late in August. That of course was Hurricane Andrew. What year was that? 1992, I
Two.
think, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
In a
here we are.
subnormal year, because that we didn't have a. We had very few tropical storms that year. It was subnormal in terms of total storm amounts.
But as you said, you pointed out, Joe, all you need is one,
And,
and
and yeah,
that was quite a one.
that was quite the
That
one.
first one, yeah.
Hey, before we get started, because this happened over the weekend, talk a little bit about this. The whole thing with the rocket launch going to the space station with two astronauts. I mean, that considering the fact that they had to kind of cut NASA out back years ago because of budgets with the 2008 financial crisis, if I remember correctly. So this must be a big hosanna, I guess you might want to call it, for you and the astronomy folk.
Yeah, and it, it it's funny thing about the guy who really helped to get this going is Elon Musk. Now you just mentioned the astronomy folks. The astronomy folks have a few things to say about Elon Musk. He has been putting up these Starlink satellites so that we will have continuous or constant internet coverage all over the world. The problem with these satellites are that they are so bright, especially the solar panels associated with them, that they're causing problems for astronomers who are trying to make long-term exposures of the sky. They all of a sudden you have one of these satellites or several of them going across the field of view, and he wants to put up something like 11,000 of these satellites. He says another 60 are expected to go up later on this week.
he
But
he
on the other hand, he was primarily responsible for getting the first manned mission up into space in almost a decade. Back in 2014, when there was some discussion with the Russians about complaints about the fact that, hey, we're paying you guys 75 and 80 million dollars to put one of our guys up into the space station, and this country, America, um, 3/4 of that space station used was put together with our dollars,
right.
and here we're paying out all these millions of dollars now to the Russians to get one of our guys up into the space station. And one of the I think it was he's now the head of the Russian space agency said back then, this is back in 2014, he said, well, if the Americans don't like the way they're getting their astronauts up into the space station, let them build a trampoline. And and at the news conference after the launch on Saturday, um, Elon Musk said knew what he was talking about, but he said the trampoline is working just fine.
Listen, um, Elon Musk, he is so innovative. He really is. He has pretty much done everything a lot of people have told him that he would never be able to do. And
Right.
he's a little bit crazy, and he sometimes is a little bit off the wall, especially if you go back a couple of years ago with the 420 stock price bid, and the whole smoking a joint on what was it, the Josh Rogan show or whatever, the podcast. But he's just incredibly innovative. Who knows what this guy's he listen. He may come up with the spacecraft like the Jupiter 2 and send a crew out to Alpha Centauri. I mean, who knows with him?
Well, do you remember what was it a couple of years ago? He actually put one of his a Tesla in space with a mannequin, a man
Mm,
behind the wheel of the car. There's somewhere out there in space right now. There's a Tesla flying
well,
around.
Tesla stock closed back over $900 a share today. Uh, Woulda, coulda, shoulda. Mm. Especially when it was down a few years ago when it was down in the
Right,
20 to 25 or 25 to $30 range or whatever it was. But
right.
enough of that. Let's roll along as we'll take a look at uh, with the start of hurricane season today. We have Tropical Depression 3, which the Hurricane Center designated at 5 o'clock this afternoon. And this, by the way, is the remnant low of Tropical Storm Amanda, which formed on the Pacific side and moved into Central America actually, they actually upgraded this, Joe, to a Tropical Storm Amanda on Saturday when the center was already inland
Right.
and in Costa Rica. And it just basically, they had gales and for a very short time. But that is one of these rare instances where you get a system that crosses over from the Pacific side, and now it's on in the Atlantic Basin side. And if it reaches tropical storm strength, and not 100% sure whether that's going to happen or not, but Cristobal is the next name.
So in other words, Amanda became Cristobal.
Yeah, so let's just not go down that particular
All
road,
right.
okay? It's a little
Okay.
these touchy times right now, so let's just leave it there. The other thing I want to show, I'm just going to bring up. I got a couple of satellite loops here because folks, if you those of you who are here every day will remember this, but we've been talking about this. We've described it as this gyre, this large spiral of of moisture that is in the Gulf of Mexico down over Central America, and what did I do with it? I've got a satellite loop that shows it really well. Here it is. I found it. Um, I got so many open screens. Sometimes it's hard for me to juggle. And then, of course, in the midst of all this, I wind up always accidentally opening up something that I didn't want to open. But here's what I'm talking about. If you look over where Central America is, you can see that the depression is actually embedded inside this rather large spiral of lower pressures across all of Central America. It extends southward into the tropical Pacific and extends northward up into the central and even the northern Gulf of Mexico. So this feature spinning around might actually, depending on what happens with this first thing, and we're going to get into this scenario shortly, but depending on what happens with this first thing, this gyre may wind up uh, spiraling out another system late this week. It's a little complicated, but very impressive for this, certainly for this time of year.
That would be amazing if we had by the end of this week a Cristobal, and then we have the D storm. I don't. I wish I should have the list in front of me here.
I'll pull it up in a
Uh,
moment. We'll work on the first ones first, but
to have
you
so
know,
many of these name systems already this early in the season, this is really going to be with the La Nina. I think and what surprised me, Joe, is that I looked at the projected forecast
hmm
for the upcoming season, and it was not made by the National Hurricane Center. The forecast for tropical storm or hurricane activity was put out by the Climate Prediction Center. They were
Oh,
the ones who put out that forecast, and they are going for an above normal year, as one would expect. And I think something like 4 or 5 possible major hurricanes. They
yeah.
didn't tell you where they may hit, but this really looks
Or
like
if they
a
hit.
very active, or if they hit,
Right.
but it looks like a very active season ahead of us.
Well, this depression here, certainly the kickoff is busy. The depression, definitely can see there's a circulation there. The core is not exactly anything to write home about at the moment, but there's some room. It's deep down in the southwest Gulf, and oftentimes when systems are down this far south, they get a lot of times they wind up getting trapped. They are uh, so far south that they don't the reach of the westerlies across say Texas and the northern Gulf of Mexico is just far enough north where it can't pick it up. So they wound up getting left behind. Sometimes those westerlies come down and pick it up and take it on up northward or northeastward. Or in this instance, you might wind up with something that turns northward and then northwestward. But we're going to watch and see what it does tonight into tomorrow. It's quite possible that this could become a tropical storm and then go inland in back into Mexico and dissipate, but you're still going to be left with this big gyre that's going to be spinning around, and with those lower than normal pressures, you could wind up with this reemerging into the Gulf, or perhaps another low will be spawned from it. The Hurricane Center talked about this in their discussion, and when we look, I've been looking at the models all weekend, and even going back to last week. There have been a lot of hints about how this may play out. So it'll be fascinating to see what comes of this. It's in a low shear environment. The water temperatures down in the southwest Gulf are pretty warm. So there's no reason why it can't suddenly become a tropical storm during the day tomorrow, as long as that center stays over the open waters.
Well, yeah, is it also possible that the system that they now have, the depression, it might actually somehow absorb that system? Or
Well, the other one other possibility is that the depression becomes a tropical storm and gets kicked out to the northeast, and
Mhm.
then as a separate entity. And this is something the GFS was kind of showing overnight and yesterday, and the UK Met model is showing that where it goes, toward Florida as a separate entity, and you still have the gyre that spawns something else late in the week or over the weekend. So there's a lot here. There's a lot happening, and I just don't know how clear cut everything is. But you can see even from the Hurricane Center's forecast, they keep it just offshore in a very very tight cluster right into um, Thursday, 1 p.m. Thursday, just kind of clustered down there, and then all of a sudden, they have it out at 1 p.m. Saturday out in the south central Gulf of Mexico. But they obviously say in their forecast, and I'm in total agreement with this, that uh, you're going to wind up with a very very low confidence here until you can figure out, what exactly is going to come out of all of this.
To be continued as life itself.
Right. So exactly. So here's we'll take a look at the latest GFS run, and we could see what I'm where the issues lie. So starting with the map for 8 o'clock tonight, of course, and you can see, here's your tropical depression. It's closed isobar there that the GFS picks up on, and the high that's off the North Carolina coast. That is going to be moving out to the east. Now, over the next 6, 12, 18, 24 hours, you see the GFS has that low kind of tucked in, doesn't really move it very much, drops the pressure down to 1,003. Probably would suggest that this is a tropical storm tomorrow morning or early afternoon. But then it brings it inland, and it just kind of sits there inland, uh, right on the coast, and then it's gone. Okay, by the time we get to later Wednesday, it's the low center has drifted back southward and it's gone, but you're still left with this gyre and very low pressures over Belize, the Yucatan Peninsula, and then another low spirals out of this and moves northward off the Yucatan Peninsula into the south central Gulf of Mexico. So my question is, and this is all a theoretical question, are these two separate systems, or because it's part of the same gyre? I'm thinking that they're going to would treat, if this scenario were to play out, I think they would consider this two separate storms. But I don't know what their criteria is for determining whether it's the remnants of one regenerated or if they are two separate entities. To me, it looks like, if I look at the GFS, it looks like they're two separate entities here.
I don't know, Joe. The GFS, especially as you've been pointing out over and over again for the time frame we're looking at, has been strongly suggesting that there would be something down there in the Gulf. I'm wondering whether or not this is just the reflection of what is now the tropical depression. Then again, it may be two separate entities. It's very confusing.
No question it is. And I'm looking at the Europe. You're trying to gain clues from the other models here. You look at the Canadian, which, yeah, I'm just pulling it up for the first time, and the first thing that popped in my mind is, where's the Category 5 hurricane? But here's the Canadian model from earlier today, and I'm just going to roll it back. I'm just, again, looking at it for the first time. The Canadian suggests that it's the depression that basically it's the same system. It keeps it in the southwest Gulf. Now, if it stays in the Gulf, it doesn't come inland and doesn't weaken and fall apart, um, then you're not going to have the second thing. It's just going to become the primary, essentially. And then the Canadian just starts to lift it northward, which is what the GFS does today with the second development. And the European, of course, and I'll just take a look at that really quick here. We could take a look at what the European does. And the European, actually strengthens it, brings it back inland, and then pops up a separate entity. You see how it goes? You see, Joe, it's in the southwest Gulf. Now, we only have it in 24-hour increments. So this is 12Z tomorrow morning. Wednesday morning, it's got it kind of wrapped up pretty tight, moving southwestward. It goes inland. There's not much there on Thursday into Friday, but you still have those lower pressures there. And then suddenly on Saturday, you've got this low that forms pretty much in the same spot that the GFS has it, in the south central Gulf of Mexico. And
Right,
to me,
right.
that looks like it's a separate entity. So you might get two names out of the way.
That would be amazing. Now, if we get two systems, do they do a dozy do around each other like or Fujiwara
Well, no,
effect?
the other one's gone at this point.
Well, yeah. All right, all right. Well, in a way, then I guess you could say that the sheer energy of the gyre, as you call it, may actually absorb or take the energy out of the impending depression, and we end up with one big system.
Now, the other thing we should look at too, I want to take a look at the upper air, because again, we're merely in speculation mode here. There's nothing here that's written in stone, but I'm giving you the Atlantic view. And what seems to be happening is, of course, we've got this trough in the east that's lifting out now, and our flow is going more west or even west southwest. You've got two upper highs. You've got one upper high that's right there in the Bahamas. You've got another upper high in Texas. And of course, right in between, all in here is your lower pressures, your gyre. And over time, what the model seems to be doing is it takes the Texas ridge, brings it over the top. So that would kind of argue that anything that forms in the Gulf eventually will wind up moving northward. And then, depending on what the ridge does, if the ridge gets shoved to the east, then you're going to deflect. It wants to deflect the system northwestward toward Texas. Or, on the other hand, the other possibility is that that ridge is not as strong and this thing just moves straight up and maybe heads for the central Gulf Coast. We have to just look. There's so many possibilities here. And we didn't even address the chance that the depression gets kicked out to the northeast, because there is a weakness here. If it gets far enough north, or it's possible that we could see this getting kicked out to the northeast before the second one forms, which is kind of what the UK Met model has shown. It's just a very unusual setup. So early in the season, you don't really expect. By the way, look at the Atlantic. There's a big big, gigantic Azores high in between a deep upper low sitting east of uh, I guess those are the yeah those are those no these are the Canaries here, the Verdes Canaries near the Azores, and then you got another big forming cutoff low south of Nova Scotia. Very crazy looking pattern there in the Atlantic.
Anthony Orr points out that the D storm is Dolly.
Oh,
Hello, Dolly.
hello. Yeah, so we'll see. It'll probably be the earliest that we've ever seen for the fourth name storm. Imagine if we get the fourth name storm before the first week of June is done. I don't think that's ever happened. Not that I can
Um,
think of.
well, there's somebody out there, some
Anthony will dig. Anthony Orr is the resident hurricane statistician, so he'll dig up that stat and find it. The other thing I did do was I brought up 2005. And the reason I brought 2005 up was because 2005 was the year we had 28 named storms. And as active as that year was, and I needed to be reminded of this. First off, the first storm, Arlene, didn't form until June 8th.
isn't that
Okay.
amazing? That's
Right.
incredible.
You had two in June. And what's starting with Cindy on July 3rd, you had a tropical storm on the map, at least one tropical storm on the map. At times you had two, um, from July 3rd all the way to July 25th, including two major hurricanes, Dennis on the 4th, July 4th through 13th in its lifespan, and Emily, which I think still holds the record, does hold the record for being the strongest ever observed so early in the season as a strong Cat 4, July 11th to the 21st. And then there's a break between July 26th to August 1st. You didn't have any tropical storms around. And then suddenly on June 2nd, you had Harvey.
Yeah.
Okay. Followed by Irene, Jose, and Katrina. So that took care of. So from the 2nd of August, then you got Tropical Storm Lee, which was a minimal tropical storm on August 28th. That lasted till the 2nd. Major Hurricane Maria at September 1st through September 10th. Now, that's obviously not the Maria from a couple of years ago. So let's see. So what did I say? Starting from August 2nd, right through September 26th, okay, you had at least one trop name storm on the map, and at times you had multiple in that stretch. Then there was a break, and then you look at October, Joe. Stan, an unnamed system, a subtropical system, October 4th and 5th. Tammy, Vince, Wilma, Tropical Storm Alpha and Beta. You, except for the 25th of October, you had a storm on the map in the month of October for every single day. That's just insane.
Crazy.
And then, of course, you had Gamma, Delta, Epsilon, and this had never happened before in the Atlantic, where we went through the entire alphabet and they had to go to the Greek alphabet. Epsilon and then Zeta, which was the last one, December 30th till January 6th of 2006. So that was an incredible year. And the other year I wanted to bring up was 2016, because 2016 is the last time. That's where we're gearing to see if we could catch this record. Obviously, by the way, that disturbance in the Central Atlantic never developed this weekend, so we didn't get the name out of the way. But Joe,
Right.
in 2016, you had, now here's the difference between this year is that Alex was in January, okay, and then you had Bonnie from May 27th to June 4th. Colin was June 5th through the 7th, and Danielle was June 19th. So I don't know if that's the earliest we've ever had a D storm. It might not be. I seemed in the back of my mind there was one year back, maybe in the 70s, where we had five named storms before. No, that might have been. Maybe the fifth named storm came by the early part of July, and then the rest of the season you had next to nothing. But here we are in 16. The third named storm was Colin on June the 5th. So it'll be interesting to see. And that year, by the way, in total, we had 15 tropical storms and hurricanes. So the uh, the early start didn't. I mean, it was above normal, but it wasn't crazy above normal like 2005 was.
Right.
This
Wow.
is. I love these tracks, trying to figure out because
I
they all
remember
over loop over each other.
I remember in 2005, they actually had they actually had a tropical cyclone that formed a few hundred miles from Spain.
Yes, I think
Um,
that was Vince.
yeah, I remember somebody at the Hurricane Center with a sense of humor said if it looks like a duck and
It
walks like a
quacks,
duck,
then it's a duck.
then it's a duck. And if it looks like a hurricane and it
Because
has
they
the
said they never seen. Yeah, it's this one here, system number 21, which was Hurricane Vince, October 8th through the 11th. There's the
right,
track. It went
right,
in right along the south coast of Portugal into Spain.
right.
And we've seen in the past few years, we've seen a number of storms in the Eastern Atlantic setting records.
Yeah,
Ophelia,
but the thing that
Lorenzo last year.
But I mean, we have seen storms go into Portugal or Spain or even up to Ireland or the UK, but they start out somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic and make that big curving loop back to
Yeah,
the north and
this
east.
this
But
form.
this one, but Vince actually started so close to Europe, and we knew that it was going to be lifting north and east. And I never saw that before.
Yeah, the first
Oh,
advisory was at longitude. What is that? I can't see.
was that like 10?
Well, let me put it this way. It wasn't. Well, it was at about 34 north. Yeah, that must be 10 west. I guess that's about 10 west.
Yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, not too far from, well, relatively speaking, pretty north of 00 Island. Those of you who could remember Colonel Bleep.
I was I was trying to I had my son here yesterday with his fiance, and for some reason or other, there was a quiet moment, and I was telling him about the shows that we used to watch when we were kids,
Yeah,
and I mentioned Colonel Bleep, and I said he was accompanied by Squeak and Scratch, the
screeches.
caveman. I'm like, and he's looking at me like, what the heck are
It
you
was a very
talking about?
primitive. I mean, it was a very, very
I wonder how many
basic,
people on the
primitive
chat board.
cartoon.
How many people on the chat board remember Colonel Bleep?
It used to be on NBC at 7 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday,
Something
if I
like that.
remember correctly.
Now, don't confuse Colonel Bleep with Dodo, the kid from outer space.
No, we will never do that. So, yeah, we'll, we're gonna obviously we're gonna be watching to see what happens as we go through this week. It's just kind of interesting to see all this, hurricane history. Let's switch gears and go to severe weather, Joe, and it could put out because Timothy Veltman brought up the Mechanicsville tornado from the 1998 uh, uh, storm, severe weather outbreak. And this is what it actually looked like on the surface map, which you can get if you go to WPC and click on the link with regards to the surface map. If you want the link, I can certainly let me. I'll save it here and put it on the chat board for you, and you can go back quite a ways in the archive in the corner to pull up an old surface map. But it isn't too often that at the end of May you have a 992 low sitting near Lake Huron with an incredibly solid warm sector pushing up into western New York and Pennsylvania. I mean, it was just crazy. 10 o'clock in the morning, you had temperatures in the 80s and dew points in the upper 60s to around 70, and it'll just push it to 2 o'clock. That was 11 o'clock in the morning and 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I mean, you had this wicked cold front, Joe, with an 88 low in southeastern Canada, and the warm front uh, pushing through eastern New York and through southern New England. I mean, it's just an absolutely stunning looking warm sector here. I don't know what the upper air looked like, but I can tell you that there must have been a really deep upper trough with all of this that was swinging through the east to trigger off the kind of severe weather that it did.
Well, Joe, I mean, if you look at the maps for tomorrow night into Wednesday morning, I mean, obviously the system in 1998 was more robust in terms of strength, but I mean the look of the maps for Tuesday night into early Wednesday morning is very similar to what we're looking back on in 1998.
Well, it's the
It,
same type of idea because you're going to have a warm sector that's kind of coming in from a west southwest, and it's always going to be a matter of does the warm front get through or doesn't it get through?
right, right.
You know, I think that's still in question for Wednesday. I don't think you're going to have an 88 low in southeastern Canada.
No,
You're not
no,
going to have the deep upper trough like you must have had with this,
no.
but you certainly may have enough to produce some severe weather out of it. And in fact, speaking of which, let's take a look at what SPC is doing. First off, just let me backtrack for tonight. Just a couple of small areas of marginal risk up in the Dakotas and parts of Montana. But then as we move on to tomorrow, we've got slight and enhanced risk across the upper Midwest into the Great Lakes and a marginal risk that reaches over into Pennsylvania. But take a look at, folks, take a look at Wednesday. And Wednesday, you've got a very long area of slight risk that runs from Nebraska across northern Kansas, through half of Missouri, much of Illinois, Indiana, into Ohio, across Pennsylvania, and just nudging into western New Jersey. But Joe, you see how they have the marginal risk only gets to about New York City, and then
Right.
the
Everything's
thunderstorm
kind of
line
squeezed
cuts
together.
off. What's that?
The boundaries are like squeezed together. As you just mentioned, the questioning of the warm front. Well, there you can see what even their SPC is saying the same thing. I
You
mean,
could
obviously,
wind up. You could wind up if the warm front doesn't get through. We could wind up seeing this severe weather area getting suppressed a little bit to the south.
right,
I think
right.
that's a that you know how warm fronts are this time of year. The models love to fly them through, and more often than not, they don't do that.
Well, if they can just push that warm front just a little bit a ways to the north and east, let's say toward Hartford or up toward Boston, we here in the tri-state area would be right in the game, so to speak, for possible severe weather on Wednesday. We'll
All right,
see.
all right. So let's. I'm going to go to the satellite loop tonight, and of course, we had a really nice day today. It should be like this all summer long, if you ask me. If you want my never to be humble opinion, nice to have temperatures that didn't get out of the 60s with a nice gusty breeze from the northwest that worked for me. Upper 60s and low 70s for much of the region for eastern Pennsylvania to southern New England. But you notice, folks, the clouds coming from the northwest, and this is the problem. We're on the edge of this northwest flow, and that means we get these weather, we're going to get disturbances, we're going to get shortwave troughs, they're going to move along, and that's going to create some issues. It looks like every day, some days more than others. The main push, I think, is going to be for Wednesday. Did you put in it for a chance for a couple of showers maybe tomorrow morning?
No, I did not.
You
In
did
fact, I
not. You
didn't have
left
any
them out.
showers. I didn't even have any showers tonight. And coming home, just a couple of hours ago, driving home, I ran into a few light sprinkles or spritzes. I was saying to myself, where the heck did this is coming from?
Well, there's something moving through New England here and just kind of clipping southeastern New York with a few clouds this evening on the loop. Of course, you can all see on the southern end of this the tropical depression, and then you've got some precip and moisture that's coming into the west up into California, where they've been going, dealing with their heat wave issues that they had back days ago. And just to check really quick on the hazards. There's still a few areas where they've got excessive heat issues in parts of Arizona and heat advisories up along the central California coast. But other than that, no. Where it was in the 90s, they've got frost advisories and freeze warnings up for the northern half of Maine. I think if there's one place where the weather this year, these last couple of months, particularly for the month of May, has been really insane. Has been in Maine because they've had snowstorms, they've had severe weather, they've had temperatures up in the middle 90s.
Right.
Okay, just a couple of days ago, middle 90s, and now they're back to frost advisories and freeze warnings. It's just crazy. That's insane. Oh, and by the way, David Schwartz, Joe, here's an interesting tidbit. David Schwartz points out that in terms of severe weather during the month of May, from the standpoint of tornado production, um, it was very quiet. There were less than 100 I think he said there were less than 100 tornadoes nationwide for the month, and that's a very low number.
Isn't that amazing though? Because the way things are today versus, let's say, 20 or 30 years ago, where everybody seems to have a portable camera or an iPhone, and whenever somebody takes a picture or a video of a tornado or a funnel cloud, it ends up on the local news or news media, and you get the impression, even though, as you just pointed out, it was below normal during the month of May. The way the media covers things these days, you get the impression that wow, there's a lot of activity going on, and you didn't see this 20 or 30 years ago
No,
like that.
because the weather wasn't really front and center at all for the most part. Plus,
Right.
who knew? Who you really didn't know too much about what was going. I mean, if you were in the weather world, you knew, but if you weren't in the weather world, it certainly didn't get the play that it does and has gotten for the last I don't know 10, 15 years or so. WPC, by the way, just to show you the problematic forecast that they have because of what is in the Gulf of Mexico and how this comes out. They are forecasting quite a bit of rain for Florida, for southern Georgia, along the Gulf Coast. Every bit of 3 to as much as 6 inches, and even some 10-inch amounts just being indicated just offshore, 7 to 10 inch amounts. So you could possibly push some of that inland, depending on how all of this plays. And this carries us through next Monday night. So the resolution of this whole scenario may not be completed a week from today. We'll just have to wait and see how it goes.
I'm trying to see in the Gulf of Mexico, and I'm trying to line it up with the color legends or whatever. But is that like 10 to 15 inches of rain?
The yellow, I think that's not the yellow. That's the shade just under yellow.
Uh huh.
That's between 10 and 15.
Yeah.
So I'm going to lean more toward the 10. So
All right.
yellow would be 10 plus. The brown is 7 inches. So 7 to 10 in the brown, which is mostly in the ocean, but it does clip that coast of Florida around the bend, around the coastal bend there.
Right.
And of course, here in the Northeast, not really a whole lot in terms of rainfall. There's some patchy areas of a half an inch to about an inch, and that's probably convectively driven with whatever we get. Most of that'll probably be on Wednesday. You see some wet weather across the lakes and on up into the upper Midwest, also in the Pacific Northwest. But the real heavy stuff is the central and eastern Gulf Coast and out into Florida again, and that's all going to be driven by the tropical system.
It looks like that'll be. I agree with you. It looks like whatever we see in the immediate area is probably going to be sometime between like 2 and 8 o'clock on Wednesday with the possible convection. But interestingly, Joe, the I'm looking at the 6-hour QPF map uh, from 2 o'clock to 8 o'clock in the evening on Wednesday. A lot of that stuff is, from like Binghamton and across into the Hudson Valley. And yet, we were talking or speculating on whether or not all that convection would stay just off to our south, which would suggest more of a heavier dose to the south of New York, not to the north. So a little confusing, but hopefully everything will come more into play or into focus over the next day or two as to exactly who's going to get what in terms of this activity. And, again, a lot is going to hinge on where that warm front is
Yep.
during the day Wednesday.
By the way, I got the radar up right now, and Joe, there are showers. There are showers heading right for you.
Oh, lovely.
And there are some showers in Vermont, Western Mass, moving into northern Connecticut. They are dropping southeastward. I kind of wish they would die out because I didn't really mention anything for this evening. Also, the other interesting thing is the GFS has all this rain coming in tomorrow morning, but you look at the radar to the west right now, there really isn't very much. I mean, here's the GFS for tomorrow. Well, it doesn't. it's not really showing much now. It does kind of fire up some showers into Pennsylvania tomorrow morning, and then they just fall apart. So maybe that's what'll happen. There'll be some showers on the radar across Pennsylvania and Western New York, and then a few blips around New York City tomorrow morning around 8 a.m., and then they just disappear. And of course, does the warm front get through or doesn't it get through? And then here comes our system for Wednesday. And again, we don't have, like we had back in 98, we don't have a 988 low up here. We just have a much weaker low and a trailing cold front that's going to be coming through. And of course, the wind's ahead of it here. It looks like, if you want to believe the GFS, Joe, I think the GFS has the warm front through here, so that would at least be more supportive for that. That would maybe support that severe weather risk area getting nudged a little bit further to the east.
And let's not also, you know, forget to point out that the dew point temperatures, which have been extraordinarily low from yesterday through today, and even tomorrow's not going to be all that bad either.
Right.
You probably jump from dew points in the 40s to the 60s in 24 hours from tomorrow to Wednesday. And of course, we know thunderstorms just love those dew points in the 60s.
Oh, they sure do.
That's the
So then
juicy
that
area.
front goes by. I'm having a tough time trying to figure out Wednesday night and Thursday. That front kind of goes by, but it's really weak. You can barely find it. Then Thursday afternoon, they fire up a few storms around from northeast Virginia to southern New Jersey, and then they fall apart. And you still got this frontal boundary kind of hanging on Friday. And of course, at this point, you start to see, and let me make it a little bit more visible here. You start to see what could be um, either the system we have now, or maybe another one that develops in that gyre, that spiral. Of course, we get the front to move on through here, and the models keep wanting to hang it up a little bit. And here comes your low moving northward. The GFS on this particular run seems like it wants to head it to the central Gulf Coast and then deflects it northwestward because of how the upper air, which we showed you earlier, how the upper air is behaving. Uh, at the end of the day, all of what you see down here, everything that's going on in this zone is S for speculative. Okay, let's go SP for speculative. And for us here in the Northeast, it's a matter of these weather systems just moving right along. It obviously is not going to be raining all the time, but we will have a couple of occasions where we will be dealing with some showers. Uh, but the vast, I would think, Joe, you wouldn't disagree with the notion that the vast majority of the time it should be rain free.
Yes, yes. Like well, I expected it to be this way this evening, but
Right. Ding dong. Um, I'm just going to widen out the U.S. map, and then we'll come back full screen. So just to take a look at what's going on in the West, you running forward this week. You just run it back a little bit. Uh, doesn't look like a whole lot is happening through the work week, and then you start to see stuff bubble up as we get into the weekend, up in the northern Rockies, into the Pacific Northwest. In fact, if you believe the GFS on Sunday, there's snow being indicated in parts of Oregon and into northeastern California, believe it or not, with the cold trough that is into the western part of the United States. And with respect to the upper air, looks like trough, deep trough in the west in the long range, Mr. Rayo. You can, by the way, folks, you can take a look here. I'm rolling it back. So our trough lifting out now, but you see how the flow is still from the northwest. So you're getting these disturbances in that northwest flow to ripple through. It can't get hot here. It can get warm or even very warm. I suspect that we're going to see temperatures get up into the 80s toward the latter part of the week before any cold fronts move on through. And then here's your trough over the weekend, which, if it behaves itself, will bring down a shot of cooler air. And of course, you've got trough in the west, trough off the east coast, and a ridge that builds up toward the Great Lakes. And this is where, if you look in the Gulf of Mexico, that's the upper feature that reflects whatever tropical system. And as we said, it gets deflected westward and then eventually gets pulled northward by the trough coming out of the west and moving eastward through the plains and into the upper Midwest. So it's going to be a very interesting time over the next week as we watch all of this play out. in my never to be humble opinion.
and never to be humble opinion. Well, you are
Try again.
Justradamus.
Nostradamus,
Yes.
yes. All right. So hey, we got a lot. We talked about a lot of stuff tonight. So let's. I'm going to bring the chat folks into this, and seeing if all the regulars are on, which is very nice indeed. So let's let me bring up Briller Jeopardy. By the way, Johnny Quest asked to ask you about the strawberry moon on the 5th, and how did it get that name?
Because if you are, and my wife, for example, is very much into gardening, the month of June is strawberry month. This is the month where people harvest strawberries, and I guess these names supposedly date back to the Iroquois or the Algonquin Indians who inhabited the northeastern United States or whatever. So they were big into strawberries, I guess, in June, and that's why the June full moon is referred to as the strawberry moon. No, it's not named after Darryl Strawberry, formerly of the Mets and the Yankees.
No. So tonight, here being in honor, it is hurricane season, so that is our theme tonight on Le Jeopardy de Brillard. And here we go. So the first one is which tropical system traveled the most miles during its entire run?
I'm going to pick a name that stands out more for longevity than for anything else. Ginger, could that have been?
Ginger was up there, but it was in terms of miles, in terms of the most miles traveled.
And it wouldn't be Kyle.
No.
Kyle, Ginger, those are the only two that stand out in my mind. So,
all right, it was Hurricane Faith in 1966, 6,850 miles from start to finish.
Really?
Yeah, they were still able to identify it somewhere up in the Arctic. Believe it or not.
Now, that storm, that hurricane, has special meaning to me because in late August of 1966, my sister, my mom, we were down in Puerto Rico for a week, and that storm was apparently taking dead aim on Puerto Rico. And I tell you what, Joe, we know, of course, what has happened in recent years to Puerto Rico with tropical systems and hurricanes. But I got to tell you, it was a scary thing because all of the radio and television stations, the newspapers, and they had the path. We did not have, of course, the accuracy that we have now. But back then, all of those projections were taking that storm right over Puerto Rico. And I could remember in the hotel that we were staying at, they were like pulling down these giant globe-like lights because they were afraid that they were going to swing back and forth and break, and people boarding up the house. But in the end, the storm at the last minute took a path just to the north and to the east of the island. And so aside from heavy undertow and sea swells and whatever, the island really escaped a major bullet. But I remember Hurricane Faith very, very well because of my situation in Puerto Rico at that time. So that's an interesting thing for Scott Briller to bring that up. I'll now file that away with my other.
Well, Faith was in 66, Joe.
Excuse me?
Hurricane Faith was in 1966.
Right. We were on a vacation. My mother had a friend.
Well, when you were young.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you were young. Okay, I'm sorry. I thought because you mentioned your wife's name, so I'm thinking, wait a minute, he might be confusing this that he went to Puerto Rico with his wife, or I misheard. Okay, I'm sorry. It's my senility that has kicked in.
No, my wife. I mentioned my wife with the strawberry moon.
Oh, okay, all right.
So the gardener and the farmer here in this.
I'm mixing metaphors. I got you.
My sister will remember that, not so much for Hurricane Faith, but I remember I said something to her, and I was always like picking on my sister. My sister's 3 years younger than I am, and it was the one and only time where I guess she took a bottle of Coca-Cola and poured it on top of my.
Oh, nice. Oh, okay. And by the way, the last
memories of that Puerto Rican vacation.
All right. So, what hurricane had the largest diameter?
The eye or the actual breadth
No,
of the
I'm
oh,
thinking in terms. I'm in terms of, I guess, satellite coverage.
okay. All right. What would be the well, Katrina was pretty big.
Well, this one actually, I have a vague memory of them making a big deal out of the fact that the thing was monstrous in terms of its size.
Hugo,
No, Bears of Hurricane Olga.
Olga.
Yeah, I don't know what year. He didn't put what year it was, but 990 miles.
Wow.
You know, from one end to the other. I don't know if that was gales, or I'm assuming that can't be gales because that's just too big. But
And
I'm get
the smallest hurricane I could ever remember seeing, small and intense,
Alicia.
was well, yeah, and
Alicia on the Texas coast. I mean, that was literally the size of. I think the gales extended out maybe about 50 miles. Well, we had that hurricane last. Was it that hurricane last year in the Caribbean? That was, basically a severe thunderstorm. It was a glorified severe thunderstorm.
yeah, all right.
It
I
was.
remember a storm in the Atlantic, and it was like a Category 4 storm. It looked like on the satellite picture like a cotton ball with a pin head for an
Yeah.
and that was Gladys.
Hmm.
I don't remember what year. I think it was like 75. I think when that storm
Could be.
occurred. So
And the tornado. Which hurricane spawned the most tornadoes?
was that Camille?
No, it was Hurricane Ivan, or Ivan, Ivan.
Oh,
120.
and then after the storm name was retired, he went to
He went
the
to
Los
he went to
Angeles
FiOS to
to be
to keep
right.
us on time. Ivan, I need to record.
Huh. Well,
Well, we.
here's one I've not seen on the chat board, but we thank him very much for kicking in a little bit to the tip jar here. Delaware Water Gap.
Oh, yes. He shows up every so often. Thank you so much. There he is. I just saw it go by. Thanks for hitting super chat tonight. Really appreciate it.
I like his little thing saying his little thing on the super chats. Hey you.
Yeah, on my and David Schwartz, thank you. 59 tornadoes in May after 351 in April. First time in 50 years at less than 100 tornadoes in the month of May. And thanks for hitting super chat, David. Joe and I really appreciate it very much. And I think we got one more. And we have a Scott Briller super chat hit tonight. We thank him for that too. Coffee, tea, cigars, bubble gum, whatever, for whatever we want. Thanks, guys. Always appreciated very much
Yes.
that when you do that. Thank you. Uh, you know what? It's cherry season. That's like a big deal for me. I love cherries, Washington State cherries. I go to Costco and buy these, like, when they have them, the 4 pound crates, and I basically spend the month of from mid May when they first show up until mid July before they disappear. I just inhale cherries.
Well, now that you know immediately after the Caracara go away, then immediately you move on to the cherries.
It's not Delaware Water Gap. Where is he?
What? What do you mean?
Oh, Delaware Weather, Joe, not Delaware Water Gap. There is a Delaware Water Gap, but no, that's
Oh,
Delaware.
Delaware Weather
That's
Guy.
Delaware Weather.
Delaware Weather Guy.
Yes.
I
It.
just I, I just I just arbitrarily saw DWG and I said, all right, well, it's Delaware Water Gap.
Oh God! By the way, I was up in northern Connecticut in Thomaston at my daughter's this weekend, which is the reason why we didn't have uh, a show yesterday. And yes, Delaware Weather Guy, the pits in Cherries. Be very careful of them. You can actually, if you watch Ozark, they led to someone's demise, and not in a way you might think. I'm not going to give it away, but just to let you know. But I was up in Thomaston, Connecticut, which is up north of Route 84. Take Route 8 all the way up in Litchfield County, and I walked. I walked mountains on Saturday and Sunday. I did 6 miles on Saturday, and I did 8 miles yesterday. And in my adventures, I stumbled on an well, Saturday I stumbled on an old railroad yard, and I have to tell you, I wish I could. I it was open. The fence was open, and I noticed that there were a couple of cars, so there might have been people working, or I didn't see anyone. I could have just walked in, but Joe, they had railroad cars that had to go back to like the 1870s or even earlier. They
Wow.
had they had old locomotive engines with coal cars. It was just crazy to see them. I mean, it was beautiful, and then at the same time it had a very eerie feel to it. And I could swear I looked at one of the passenger cars, and all like in terms of the age, and I'm not an expert at this, even though I love model trains and railroads. But I looked at one of the stretch of the two passenger cars that they had attached to the coal car, and all I could think of was the train that they used to bring, when President Lincoln was assassinated, and they took the body on the train on a train trip across the what was the U.S. at the time. I mean, these cars were just incredibly old. And then yesterday, on my second walk, I walked through the town of Thomaston, which I didn't know this, but it was part of several towns in Connecticut where clocks were made and watches. And of course, now I understand. I don't know if they still make them, but the Seth Thomas, that is who Thomaston, the town of Thomaston, is named after, and they had his mansion there, and he was a clock and watchmaker. And
Wow.
then I stumbled into another. I went to the Railroad Museum, which is another big old train yard with a train station and a depot and all these old train cars. It was just I was in my glory yesterday. And on top of that, the weather was just absolutely stunning. Deep,
Yes. It was a
deep blue
beautiful,
sky,
beautiful day.
sunshine. What a day it was. It was just beautiful.
Fantastic.
It's just beautiful.
Did you get a chance to see the cannonball?
On its way to Petticoat Junction.
Yeah. Maybe you might have run into Mr. Drucker or Uncle Joe.
Oh, by the way, speaking of which, I meant to mention this to you, and now I don't even remember how they did this. But MeTV did this whole thing that last week was Mayberry month, so Mayberry, right?
Right.
But the last week they were running promos because it was apparently, I think, Aunt B week, and I
Right.
and I don't remember the pun that they used with B something, whatever it was. But it was all episodes surrounding Aunt B. I didn't get to watch any of them, but I just wanted to. I love their promos because they're so clever.
Oh, they're fabulous with their promos. In fact, Rod Serling. They did a Twilight Zone episode, and it sounds like Rod Serling is actually saying Oliver Wendell Douglas. Unless somebody did a very good imitation of him. And then there was actually, I guess, an episode of Green Acres where Eddie Albert says it's almost like being in the Twilight
Yeah,
Zone.
yeah. Well, you don't know these days with technology the way it is. You don't know what's real and what's not.
Right,
They have that whole thing with Mr. Haney pulling down the what do you call that, like a
right,
shade down the side of the
right,
truck. I don't think that
right.
was in an episode where
No,
he did that.
yeah, no, there was,
Well,
I
he would
watched,
pull down a chart or
he,
something.
he pulls down, he's trying to sell things. And I guess all they did was they used like a Photoshop or something to
Oh yeah,
lay
they
out what
just
was
yeah, of
original.
course. And they're able to change it to whatever they want, and
I mean,
then they dub the audio however they want. They just be able to pull the words out and make it sound like they're actually saying things that they wouldn't say.
but I should send you, and it's on YouTube. There was about 20 episodes of Green Acres where in the opening credits, the director by and the written by person or whatever like that, they'd appear, Lisa would be pulling an egg out from underneath the chicken, you know, and the name would be on the egg. And
Yes.
or they would be asleep in their room and all of a sudden she'd turn on the light and say, Oliver, I think I just saw a written by. I saw a director by.
Bye. Christinapedia has a Seth Thomas mantle clock. It's a wonderful little day trip. It's a small town. You could do it in one day. It would be it's about a 2 hour. I would say if you draw it, you take the Port Jeff ferry, you break it up, and when you get to the other side in Bridgeport, you go right on Route 8, and you take Route 8 all the way up to Thomaston, and you get off. I think it's exit 41 or 42, Route 6, and it's right off the exit. It's so easy to get to, and it really it was really nice. Unfortunately, everything was closed, but if you're into that sort of small town stuff and going into museums, which I am, I enjoy that. Definitely, I recommend going up to Thomaston. And if you want, Quincy McCoy saw pictures of. I put pictures up on Facebook yesterday, so if you go to my Facebook page, you can see them. You go to the meteorologist Joe Chaffee weather page, or if you're on my regular personal Facebook page, I put the pictures up yesterday, along with the delicious breakfast that my daughter made for me yesterday, which was burned corned beef hash with
Oh,
poached, because I love burned corned beef hash on toast with poached eggs, eggs Benedict with hollandaise sauce, all homemade. It was delicious. And then
oh,
Saturday, my son-in-law made the best ribs I have ever had ever. I would put these ribs up against the best ribs made by expert chefs. They were amazing, absolutely amazing.
well, now that you've gotten me all hungry after I just finished dinner a little while ago, but now I have to now go to a job that, yeah, it's 8 o'clock. I made a discovery today, Joe.
Yes.
There's a wasp's nest, or one of these. It looks like one of these mud daubler things on the top, right at the top of my garage.
Hmm.
And so
I've had those.
so it's 8 o'clock. The sun is setting. The wasps are usually now in their little new abode, and it's time to give them the spray to get rid of it. So
Yeah, I do always do it after sundown because they go seepy by, so they're easier to get rid of.
exactly.
All right, so we did a lot of weather tonight. Thanks again for everybody being here. Thanks to the super chat hits tonight from everyone. Joe and I, as always, we deeply appreciate it, and we will see you tomorrow. Same bat time, same bat channel. Patreon, folks. There's extra weather stuff going on there, so you can check that out. And that's it.